Fiction frees you, doesn't it?
Well, that is interesting you mentioned that, because when I was a girl growing up in the country, upstate New York, it was a kind of strange gender divide, because girls never said anything remotely profane. I mean, not obscenity was completely off of the radar, but girls were sort of nice or ladylike or something, even though we didn't feel ladylike. Whereas the boys had all sorts of anything. Boys were just sort of, I think, obsessed with these forbidden words. Now, they wouldn't say these words around adults. It was sort of the playground ethos. And I was always struck by that boys had more freedom of a kind of explosive language.
So you've waited, haven't you? You've waited.
I've waited a long time.
Just to expose us to these things that you're holding in.
Well, I've sort of learned the language of the captors, the language of the other gender. I think by being a writer, one takes on a larger language than one would have without this access to other vocabularies.
Do you ever just kind of want to do that? Do you ever just sort of, when we're someplace together, do you ever just want to say, fuck this?
No. No, I actually don't.
I've never heard you say anything profane in the 35 years that we've been friends.
I don't, but because these characters are not myself,
nice.
You know, basically. Do you know those strange busts of Messerschmitt? Is that his name? Messerschmitt? Do you know
no, I don't.
Those very ugly things? How would you describe them? It was a sculptor who had been disappointed in his career, quite a gifted sculptor, but a very temperamental man. He didn't get like a state appointment that would have been very important to him. So he went off somewhere and he did this series of busts. If you saw if you saw them, you recognize them. They show very distorted, distended faces of disgust, madness, boredom, lunacy, all these things that people may think but keep to themselves. And I find them very painful to look at. They're often in psychology textbooks. I'm sure the people in the room have seen them. There must be 30 of them. They're like the face of lunacy of somebody who is extremely outraged and murderous, who can't show it to the world, so he's maybe looking in a mirror, and the faces are very distended. So that kind of freedom that the sculptor gave to himself, I think, is this, what we call an explosive kind of subversive language, is what you can do. And then also the reverse is true, that we can be sentimental and sweet and kindly and nice, things that may be difficult for some men to do. They can do it in their literature and not be considered sentimental.
You know, there's a wonderful little essay of Richard Hugo's called The Triggering Town, which many of you may know. It's this sort of iconic essay for poets and for fiction writers too. And one of the lines in the essay of Dick Hugo's has him saying what he would or wouldn't do in a poem. He would use this word and he wouldn't use that word. And he said, to not use this word would be to lie about my feelings. And I take note of that, because I wonder if, in fact, when you write that, or when I write something, if in fact what we write in a novel, in fact, is our feelings. That there's a kind of a fidelity to what we put in a novel which actually does portray what we think, or is there a distinction?
Well, near the end of your novel, when your character is a high school teacher in Windsor, he's teaching these
Where Joyce used to live.
Where I used to live, yes. But I think your character speaks very well. The students say, why are we reading about this? Because this has nothing to do with our lives. And Richard's character says, why do you only want to know about your own life? You know, you should be interested in other lives. And I think that's basically why we write. And I think that there are kinds of language and emotions that we don't have in our own lives that we can evoke in the writing.
whether we actually entertain them ourselves or not. They're in us to say.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You can have characters say all kinds of things, and you can have people say about your books that your books portray this and your books say this, but they actually may be quite divergent from what you yourself.
I think so, if you're true to your characters. Yeah. And what struck me about reading Canada is that the character is so different from Frank Baskin.
Yeah.
It's basically like you're on vacation from this like 180-degree difference, and nobody can say that you're both characters, obviously, and yet you're sort of evoking and creating both. But one thing that I think is sort of an interesting issue is the idea of genre. If you write children's books and young adult books, which I have done, you are basically allowed, as the protocol, or it's expected of you, to be much more direct in what you think and what you say, and have virtually no irony. Now, when we write, as adults, in adult literary fiction, is fraught with irony. Irony is basically like the ink that we're writing in. And yet, with young adult fiction, and particularly children's books, there's no irony at all.
And by irony, are you describing a discrepancy between one thing and another?
Yeah, just this sort of doubleness. What makes the texture of literary fiction so interesting is that you can read a paragraph and savor it, and maybe get different meanings out of it. You certainly can do that. Well, with Richard's writing, I hope with mine, and say with James Joyce, or Henry James, that opens itself to different interpretations. Whereas with a young adult fiction and children's literature and some other kinds of writing, it's right on the surface, And they're not afraid to be sentimental. They're not afraid to evoke things that you and I would draw back from because we would think it was corny or was excessive or over the top. However, if one of the reasons that the memoir is such a lively genre in our time is that many people can only write honestly about themselves in a memoir. Because if they try to write a novel, again, it's fraught with so many things that you're not supposed to do in a novel. It makes it more self-conscious.
I was interested that you set a large portion of this book, Mud Woman, in upstate New York. Joyce was just elected to the New York State Hall of Fame.
Thank you for that feeble applause. It's absolutely
but it withholds
appropriate.
But they're restraining themselves.
Thank you for the restraint.
But you set this book, at least part of this book, in an area that's upstate, more or less around where Ithaca is, and you are from much, much farther west of there, north of Albany, Millersport.
North of Buffalo.
Yeah. You wrote once that novels often originate out of a sense of homesickness.
Yes.
And I wonder, when you set things in a place like that, does that compensate for some absence in your life, or does it address some sense of longing for a place that you were young?
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, whether when you were writing, it's such an evocation of place in Canada, whether when you were writing these very visual scenes, you actually felt as if you were right there. Because when I write a physical, geographical scene, I'm right there. And my eyes are sort of looking around. And I'm right in the field, or I'm in the road, or I'm walking along the sidewalk. It is such an uncanny and thrilling experience. And I sort of felt that when I read Thomas Hardy,
Yes.
when I was reading Canada, there's scenes in Saskatchewan where the boy is walking around. He's sort of aimlessly just walking and feels invisible. I sort of felt that visceral sensation of a real adventure, that you're out taking a walk, and literary critics and reviewers may talk about themes and writing and all these things that they sort of tick off, But I think the actual excitement for the writer is this visceral thrill of having an adventure and not necessarily knowing what's around the corner.
Right. You know, the line of Randall Gerald's, he's referring, I think, to Thoreau, in which he says that a writer is not so much a person who has the experience as much as it is a person who needs to have the experience. And that's kind of true, because there is an exhilaration in, irrespective of where it's taking place, not being where you are, projecting yourself onto some broken up, crumbly street on a vestigial town in Saskatchewan, and just simply being there. But it must be like what you want the reader to experience, because I mean, for the reader to think about, I'm not going to be here where I am, I'm going to be in upstate New York in some little backwoods community, is necessarily, whether you like it or not, whether something happens there or not, just to be there imaginatively is pleasurable.
It's very pleasurable. That's one of the reasons that Ulysses is such a great book of life, because it's like a mirror that's held up as a magnifying mirror. And you're walking around Dublin and you're crossing the street, you're walking with Leopold Bloom, and it's just so sensuous and so beautiful. It just sort of comes alive. So when you're reading Ulysses, it's like it all comes back to life so magically again. And I guess that's what we mean by the power of art, that it's really ahistorical. It's not necessarily 1904, but it could be right now.
Now you've ducked my question by throwing it back at me. About the business of homesickness.
Homesickness, yes. That's definitely the reason that I write. I feel very lonely. When I'm not working on a novel, I feel extremely lonely. And I'm sort of clutched at by loneliness. I feel very homesick. And just the thought of creating a novel where I might have a family in the novel already makes me feel better. I think I'm yearning for that family situation where something's set in motion, and 200 pages later somebody walks in the door, somebody's gone, and you think the person's missing and comes back. You know, there's this sense of time and place. If I just think that I can write a novel, that will be helpful. But if I felt that I couldn't organize these inchoate feelings into some sort of aesthetic structure, then I would think I would be extremely anxious or depressed.
So it's consoling for you then to write a book?
Absolutely, very much. Yes, the sentences are sort of like climbing a ladder. You know, when you climb, you have faith that there's a rung there, and you're kind of climbing, and the rungs are somehow there. And it's hard to talk about. That's why I was going to ask you, because I thought that maybe some of those feelings of homesickness might be propelling some of your writing. Because
you know what my home is, so to say, is who I live with. You know,
Boy, that's true.
But then there's that other place too, which is where I came from, and it's Mississippi, and where we just spent the year, and I have so, in a way, suppressed that feeling of homesickness about Mississippi, if I ever had it, because it's for me, it's not a place I
well, let's just say home.
Yeah.
Not home, not place, but your novel's about a boy who's 15 and basically loses his father and his mother.
Right.
I mean, that's your life too.
Yeah.
So you were reliving your emotional life with different players, so to speak. You're just sort of reliving that life that was traumatic, and it's very painful. And this boy doesn't have the adventures or the experiences initially that you expect in like a Dickens novel or a Saul Bellow novel. He's actually kind of abandoned by, he's up in Saskatchewan.
Right.
He's not immediately taken up by Arthur. You know, for a while he's sort of ignored. And in the novel by Saul Bellow, like The Adventures of Augie March, you have a bright young boy. And he's immediately taken up. He's taken up by all sorts of people. He's talked to, he's treated like a son. And maybe that was Saul Bellow's experience as a bright young boy. But I'm willing to bet that the experience of your character is much more universal, where you're not taken up, where somebody is alone and lonely and eating his food all alone and looking out the window, and the fatty is taken up by Arthur, and it turns out to be a negative thing, but it's instructive. But that seemed to be a very realistic portrait of somebody who is completely alone, and even his twin is gone.
Right. I always think that whenever I'm asked to assign anything that I write to anything autobiographical, that's basically selling my imagination short. Because I like to think, well, Christ, if I can only just write about the things that are compensatory that happened to me. You know, I lost my father in the middle of my adolescence, and therefore I write books which are compensatory, which is probably true.
But that gives you the emotional momentum.
Yeah, it does.
It's like a subterranean flow. The greatest writers have been obsessive about certain things. Eugene O'Neill was always writing about his father and his mother. I think he hated his father, but he loved to hate his father. Ernest Hemingway was writing about his mother in different ways. He hated his mother, but he loved to hate his mother. D.H. Lawrence is writing about things obsessively. Proust, James Joyce. I mean, it's just basically Dostoevsky. It's the way writers are, I think, to be obsessive is somehow.
You think we're always obsessive about, you know, is this a long build-up to the wound in the bow? Is this a long Edmund Wilson build-up to?
Well, I don't know. I think that there's a great beauty in melancholy. And I often write about not so much my own experiences as my mother's and my grandmother's experiences. They seem to be really deep in me. The whole idea that somebody might have been intended to die, somebody might have been intended to be killed, as in my novel, but she isn't. And so the rest of her life is a strange gift. So even, which was the case with my grandmother, I was very close with my grandmother. She was almost murdered when she was 14, but she wasn't. And because she wasn't, all that life that followed, she met my grandfather, my father was born, and I was born, and my brother. I mean, basically the fact that she wasn't killed in 1917 when it was, all these things flowed from it. And there's a kind of wild exhilaration in reliving that. So I've written about that quite a bit. It's not really autobiographical. It's more just a strange thrill of having escaped what would seem to have been a destiny, but you escape that destiny, and you know you're still living and you're alive and you're doing these things. To me, that's just very exciting, and I can write about that over and over and over again, but in different terms.